All right, guys. Well, welcome to Seller Sessions on this lovely Thursday. Not sure where you are in the world. My name's Adam. I'm based here in Park City, Utah. After 800 inches of snow, literally the most snow we've ever had, it feels like spring again. The last 4 days have actually been sunny. So, to those folks in the Southern Hemisphere, thanks for trading over your warm weather. We're excited to have it here in North America. So, if you guys don't know my story, just a quick little backdrop for the topic of today, which is really diving into what is the true real state of the Amazon exit space. You know, you hear a lot of headlines. We've seen a lot of the ups and downs in the Amazon M&A exit market, and have really assembled what I think is the dream team of folks that have a pulse on the space and what's really happening. So my story is very close to the Amazon exit space. I actually sold my first brand that I built and started from scratch back in June of 2020, which was really near the froth of the market, close to the top. Very exciting time, very interesting time. We had 60 plus aggregators enter the space, $10 billion plus raised. And just as a business geek, frankly, it was one of the most exciting business case studies of all time. And the fact that I knew a lot about Amazon, had built a brand, had exited a brand, it's something I've really been close to here over the last couple of years. But a lot's changed, both with the macro environment of the economy, with broader e-com, and then specifically the Amazon exit market itself has also shifted. So as I said, I've assembled folks that I truly trust, that have a pulse on what's actually happening. We're talking about some of the largest investment banks with literally billions in transactions, one of the leading online brokerage firms, one of the best lawyers in the space that has probably seen more LOIs and paperwork than anybody on planet Earth as it relates to Amazon brands, and a good buddy of mine who is not only an ex-Amazonian, he also worked for an Amazon aggregator as a seller himself and helps sellers exit. So we're going to get into intros here in a second, and I'm just going to kind of throw everybody on screen here. This is the motley crew of the best, in my opinion, in the Amazon M&A space. But welcome everybody here. I just want to kind of set the tone. So I think the reason I started sharing stuff publicly on YouTube and ultimately joined this Seller Sessions podcast is because I want to help sellers. You know, it's a lonely journey. We all kind of exist on our laptops for the most part. A lot of the businesses that are built and scaled and exited in the space are not your traditional business. And so having the access to information and people and pulse of what's actually happening really has a fundamental impact on how people can start, scale, and exit Amazon businesses. And so all the folks that are here have built businesses that, in my opinion, also serve Amazon sellers. Selling an Amazon business up there with, you know, marriage, birth of a child, some of these big life events is probably one of the largest impacts that could ever happen in someone's lives. So I know you guys are all kind of attuned to helping sellers. And so I really want that to be the theme of the conversation and kind of the root of it, if we can all tap into it. I recognize that you guys have relationships with aggregators, and there's things that you kind of got to be a little bit careful about what you say and do, and certainly respect that. But I think this is the intention of this podcast is really to serve sellers and let everybody kind of know what's really happening. And I think there'll be a lot of value for everybody in the industry as a result. So with that, I'll maybe kind of turn the table over if we can kind of do some quick 20, 30-second elevator intros of everybody on the panel, just to bring everybody up to speed with who's chatting, and then we'll dive into it. So Mikhail, maybe we'll start with you and we'll run the table down from there.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you for having me here today. So I'm Michal Barmol-Doron. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Fortinet. Fortinet is an investment banking firm, operational since the end of 2018. We've accompanied to date more than 150 Amazon sellers selling their businesses. And we are a team of about 40 professionals from different fields, investment bankers on top of everything, as well as e-commerce lawyers, Amazon sellers, past sellers, financial experts. And with that, we're doing our best to get the maximum potential results for our clients.
Awesome. Great to have you on. Billy, we'll pass it over to you next.
Sure. I'm Billy Evans, founder of FBA Private Market, which is a platform focused exclusively on 7- and 8-figure Amazon FBA exits. Prior to that, I was an M&A attorney at a big firm in New York City. and I've been in the Amazon FBA space, M&A space since 2015. I did my first 7-figure deal in 2016. So very much looking forward to talking about how the market's evolved and where it's heading.
Man, I didn't even know you could exit an Amazon business in 2015. So we're bringing in the OGs on this one. John, we'll pass it over to you, brother.
Adam, thank you. And thank you for inviting me. I feel sort of out of place, kind of like an undergraduate that stumbled into a graduate level classroom, and hopefully you don't boo me off stage, but it's great to be here. I feel like I'm going to learn as much as I hopefully contribute. My name's John Durkitz. My background is actually jumped into the Amazon space working at Amazon, led the 3P electronics category for a few years before, as Adam mentioned, I decided to jump into the seller world. Started a private label brand, which I still run to this day, but had a partial exit. Spent some time at an aggregator on the buy side. And these days, I'm mostly a buyer for my own portfolio. I run a little holdco of acquisitions, investments, and then also advise sellers and help them exit. I'd say about 80% of my advisory work is on the sell side. About 20% is on the buy side.
Cool. Awesome, man. And appreciate the humility, because you're probably one of the smartest people I know, but appreciate that, man. All right, Paul, proving that lawyers can actually be cool. I'll pass it over to you next. Oh, you're on mute, buddy.
Okay, so also debunking the myth that lawyers can be cool, because I'm also quite a bit clumsy. No, thanks so much to be in the presence here and be a part of this show. I'm Paul Raffleson. I'm an attorney, former Amazon seller from like 20 years ago, back in the day. And a couple of years ago, I started a law practice that was basically designed to be a seller advocacy law firm. My background is big corporate law. I was a corporate tax and corporate law attorney with Microsoft and Walmart and General Electric, and then wrote a blog post a couple of years ago and it snowballed into a law practice. Our law firm, we've done a lot of Amazon exits. We've kind of been active, I think, since 2019, really helping Amazon sellers and watching the aggregator market establish itself. I don't know, we're well over, I think 2021 alone, we did about $250 million of deals for our clients in terms of actual cash received. And 2022 and 2023 have been also maybe not quite as strong as 2021, but very strong. And we love helping sellers exit, and we're very much more focused on the seller side in terms of we don't represent big agri. We think we're better served as a seller advocacy law firm. So we typically focus on serving sellers or individual buyers, just not big aggregator buyers. So because we want to have our focus on the seller.
Awesome, man. Great to have you. And last but not least, Jason, proving that private equity guys don't need to wear ties. I'll let you do an intro and we'll get into it.
That's right. Wore this Hawaiian looking shirt just for you, Adam. Yeah, thanks for having me. This is awesome. Quick background, I'm a founder of Global Wired Advisors. We're an investment bank that started in 2016. So we saw the early days, like Billy did. We've been a kind of a digital first, e-commerce focused consumer products investment bank for the last 7 years. I think we did, a name we all know, Thrasio. I think we did their second deal ever. So we saw a pre-aggregator. Now we're seeing kind of all this, go down. It's been an interesting journey for sure. We've helped, hundreds of sellers, done hundreds of millions of dollars of deals over the last 7 years. Really enjoy the space a lot. Love this community. It's dynamic. It's interesting. It's non-traditional. So we love working with them. Also, by the way, founder of a fairly new incubator fund called South Call, where we're actually helping sellers kind of grow their companies and take equity interests in those brands. And then pre all this, I was an investment banker with Bank of America, and then ran capital markets for a $30 billion hedge fund in Miami. So yeah, excited to be here. Excited for the chat.
Awesome, guys. Thanks for the intros. So I'm not your traditional interviewer. Like I said, I'm kind of a seller first, and kind of was corporate for a very long time, but I've shed that part of my identity and just like to have real talk. So, I think you're supposed to kind of butter things up and soften things up and then get to the hard questions later. I actually want to target probably one of the more difficult questions right off the bat and kick it off right. And the reason is kind of getting back to that kind of tone setting that I said is I think this is really what sellers don't have access to, this question. And really want to know the answer to. And I know that you guys can help unlock that. So just looking at the aggregator market in general, which has been one of the core buyers, at least over the last 2-3 years, for Amazon sellers, there's about 10 that I've calculated that have done over $100 million. So we've got Grove, Uni, Forum Brands, Foundry, Elevate, Boosted, Cap Hill, Aquico, Heyday, Perch, and the infamous Thrasio. Beyond that, there's 50 plus other ones that have kind of cropped up. Some of them have faded off. Some of them are playing defense. There's been some new ones that have entered here in the later stages that are kind of active. And I want to recognize that there's a time to be offensive and there's a time to be defensive in business. And the folks that aren't actively buying brands, I actually don't think it's a bad thing. You got to kind of play the hand that you've got and be strategic about how you build and grow your businesses. So some of those aggregators, both the big ones and the small ones, have kind of parked for the time being and said, hey, how do we kind of cultivate the portfolio that we've got? Not to say that they wouldn't buy businesses at the right price or that they're not paying attention to it. But there's a big difference between playing defense and people that are actively buying Amazon brands. So I'm going to turn it over to the folks here because I actually don't even know the answer to this completely, but you guys are close to the deal flow. You kind of know who's in the action, who's not, etc. Who is actually buying Amazon brands right now? If you kind of look back over the last 3 months, let's start kind of looking at the aggregators that that are still active and playing offense. And I'll just turn that over openly to the group to see who's brave enough to answer first.
I'm brave as long as you don't ask to get names.
Well, we need names. We need names.
Name. Yeah. Do you allow some general comment here?
Yeah, let's go general, and we'll see if anybody wants to name names after.
So I want to say that altogether this aggregator space is becoming more mature, and they are facing a kind of a certain phase in their growing path or growing pain, if you like. So we see and we see aggregators coming and going as of active buyers. At any given moment in the past, let's say from the beginning of 2022, this is when things have started to change. At any given moment, we do see actual active aggregators as buyers, alongside others that are parking, as you mentioned. It became apparent that you cannot base your deal only on the ability to sell to aggregators. So if before that we have made sure that strategic buyers and private equities will join our processes, just to give to hit better prices, better results. These days, I don't think that we have a single deal in which we are relying only upon a potential acquisition by aggregators. So this has become part of the routine. Altogether, it's good. I think it's a good sign and good thing. It comes with more efforts from everyone's side, but the end outcome is better to everyone. So that's the general statement. Now, if you want to get names, let's see who among my friends can give.
I'm happy to give some names. So I agree with everything she said. Generally speaking, that's all true. You've got new aggregators coming. You have individuals buying. We're seeing Amazon sellers buying other Amazon sellers, which is interesting. On the aggregator front, Go North is very active. I'm happy to share that. Cap Hill is active still. Yaba. There's others, and those are kind of, I would put them in the aggregator space. But yeah, I think one of the more interesting developments is sellers. And it's almost like sellers have watched all this go down over the last year or two and asked themselves, why aren't we doing this? We know how to operate these brands, and they can get access to funding. And so we're seeing some of that, which is exciting.
Cool.
Yeah, I think that's an important point too, is that there's definitely a learning curve to being an aggregator. And I think, a lot of aggregators who kind of hit their stride late in 2021, or maybe not even until 2022, just have a distinct advantage of learning from the mistakes made by their predecessors. And so the sort of the feel of the deal is different. They're much more conservative in a way that they were a little bit more cowboyish back in 2020 and 2021. And, some aggregators are even relying on the seller to be a major part of the deal for sometimes they want to stay on for a year or 2 years and the reason being is a lot of people believe that the aggregators, the early ones, such as Thrasio and company, may have gotten a little bit of aggregator ingestion, maybe oversimplified their business model, and it turned out and didn't work, and they undervalued how much the individual seller and owner of the company, their involvement, really plays a part in the success of the company. And so we're seeing that basically so the requirements are changing, but there's definitely aggregators buying, and to my health point, there's a lot of non-aggregators buying. That's the thing. Just because the aggregators aren't buying, as long as there's money out there to borrow, you're seeing buyers from other places, strategic buyers, individual buyers, like you said, other seller buyers. A lot more SBA loans I've seen lately than typicals, which is small business administration loans for those of you overseas. So yeah, I mean, the market's still interesting, but I do think that the new crop has the benefit of hindsight that the old crop didn't get.
Cool.
Yeah, I think, Adam, I would add to that. There's kind of this group, I call them kind of the middle of the road group, that a lot of them kind of raised money a little bit later in the cycle. And guys like Monolith, guys like Society, and also a lot of the non-US guys who kind of were just a little bit later, honestly had a little bit of the benefit of seeing some early mistakes potentially made. And what's also been interesting is, you've seen, we're kind of using one word, right? This word aggregator to describe something that honestly has been shifting over the last 12 to 15 months as well. So the guys that are out there that have raised $200, $300, $100 million that are being active in the space, what they're really doing is they're shifting their focus, most of them, to not saying, hey, I'm a purely Amazon kind of focused operation, right? I'm looking for a more holistic approach. Yeah, we'll definitely look at Amazon brands that are literally all their sales are on the marketplace, but we're also thinking about it in terms of the broader consumer spectrum in all channels. And so they a lot of them started out even with a little bit more of that heavy Amazon focus, and they've kind of pivoted it a little bit. It's still there, but it's only part of the picture now. It's not the whole picture.
Cool. Well, I appreciate everybody opening up to varying degrees. I know it's not an easy thing to talk about, but just the names and the context that you guys kind of presented helps a ton. So I'll maybe kind of direct this one at John, because I know he's got a pretty unique skill set. Again, worked at Amazon, worked at an aggregator, has built and scaled and sold his own businesses and helps others do the same. There's a couple themes here, right? We kind of talked about the kind of cowboy gunslinger phase where it was just kind of buy as many brands as humanly possible, grow that top line, raise more debt, which was cheap at the time. And then there's kind of the hangover that occurs from that. And, going from the spreadsheet to the real world of actually kind of operating these businesses and piecing them together in what became a more difficult macro environment was easier said than done. And so I think one of the symptoms of kind of the slowdown has just been like, hey, we got to actually settle into this and figure out how to operate these things. John, kind of knowing both your aggregator experience as well as growing and scaling brands, you want to just kind of speak to the process of what it's like in reality, especially the last couple of years of actually building and scaling an Amazon brand?
Yeah. I think stepping into a business is really challenging, whether it's an Amazon business, an e-commerce business, or just a small and medium business. And partnership with the prior owner, the seller, is something that was maybe lost in the shuffle, in the frenzy of kind of the heyday of buyer activity, of aggregator activity. There was this view that with the right operating team in-house, all that institutional knowledge, that tribal knowledge that the seller brought to the table with respect to their brand, with their partners, was maybe less valuable. And I think what's been proven out, among other things, is that partnership with the prior owners needs to be solid, and it needs to last longer than I think most sellers were willing to stay on for, or most buyers were willing to have sellers be a part of the enterprise for. I think another reality of operating businesses that you acquire, and in turn operating a portfolio of acquired businesses, is that the operational load, the operational complexity, it doesn't scale linearly. It scales exponentially. And that's the hard truth that many aggregators are now facing when they've maybe over-acquired. Those scale economies that they were hoping for on the back end are really just scale complexities. And until you have kind of the operational infrastructure, team, tech, and processes, really, you're not going to be able to drive kind of the efficiencies that this operating thesis was originally conceived off of. So I know that's maybe a little abstract, but the TLDR is that these businesses are hard to operate, whether you're a solopreneur just starting out or you've acquired one. And I caution people to think otherwise. That's not to say that this isn't a great asset class, but it is hard. And the beauty of the Amazon community, as I've found it, and you've touched on, Adam, is that there is a wide network of support. There are people like you, like others, who want to give back and to help. And so I would encourage and challenge buyers in the future to lean into that as a way out.
Cool. Love it, man. And I completely agree with your insights. So one of the things I kind of want to talk about, which is a dynamic that some of you guys talked about, which is the non-aggregator class of buyers, but really just kind of thinking about sellers and what I think has become this new no man's land. So, if you look back to mid 2020, kind of when I exited my business, kind of the floor for most of the buyer class that would kind of look at, hey, what's the minimum threshold for an asset that I'd want to acquire, was somewhere in that like $200,000 to $250,000 SDE earnings range, which kind of puts you in the low seven figures. You could exit a brand and have a lot of action. For the people that I've seen that have been active, obviously, as you build a 9-figure plus business, the level of effort to integrate a business that's doing $1 million versus one that's doing $10 million top line, you kind of go to the 10 million because it's about the same level of effort in terms of kind of transactions and integration. So a lot of the businesses that I've seen now are looking at a minimum of 500,000, but that's really crept up to like $1 million kind of minimum in earnings to really get the attention of those people that are playing offense right now, which I think is challenging for the space of Amazon FBA sellers, because I think a lot of your solopreneurs, your folks that maybe have a handful of VAs, it's not inconceivable or really that challenging to get that business to $1, $2, $3 million top line. But when you start cresting into a mid 7-figure business or a low 8-figure business, frankly, the skill set, the money, the resources to do that, especially in an environment that's been a little bit soft on the consumer side, becomes challenging. So I think my concern, I guess I would say, is what are those buyers that haven't reached that terminal velocity of, say, $1 million in earnings? What do they do? Like, do we have a shot at exiting a business? If so, what does that look like? How have those dynamics changed for those folks that are in that kind of sub $1 million in earnings? And I'll maybe turn that over to folks that have seen a lot of those transactions take place here over the last 6 months.
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick, Adam. And we don't do a lot of deals that are kind of down at that size, but I definitely know that it really comes down to, I think, a couple things, right? And this is something any seller right now sort of needs to be asking themselves. Like, first of all, do I have a sellable business at all? Right? That's kind of one question. If I do, okay, who is my audience? And what's my likely kind of valuation parameters, right? I think on the smaller end, I think something Paul mentioned earlier, I mean, what's been interesting is, pre-aggregator, even though a lot of these lenders didn't love the space, a lot of the smaller deals were done as SBA kind of funded acquisitions. Like we've kind of seen a resurgence, I'd say, of that in terms of, kind of driving more transactions in the sub $5 million total, kind of valuation space. So I think that, that has actually been a positive development for, I'd say, that part of the market, even as a lot of the more institutional guys, including these aggregators, are kind of pushing up their minimums. So I think there's that. I think so. So I think it's not as though your market there's not a market there, but you have to sort of dig into the fundamentals of your business and say, okay, how is a buyer going to view it? A lot of these buyers are now going to be more of those kind of owner operator type buyers. So looking at it through that lens versus the institutional lens, which is a very different, I'd say, buying approach, is another thing to think through. But a lot of it just comes down to fundamentals. Do I have a solid business? Because a strong business, even if it's smaller, typically gets an audience, right? A weak business, no matter the size, tends to suffer and doesn't get an audience.
Cool. And Billy, I'll maybe kind of turn it over to you specifically. I think you've got a lot of those larger scale brands that kind of attract a wide multitude of buyers. I've also seen some recently on your list and in the past couple of months that are of that kind of sub-terminal velocity that gets all buyers to the table. What's your approach for folks that are, say, doing $1 to $2 million in revenue, call it $250 to $400,000 in STE? What's the marketing approach like on that, and what kind of buyer activity you tend to see when you post those deals?
Yeah, so typically we won't take a deal that's under 500 in SDE, because the thrust of your entire question is that's really where the buyers start to get excited across almost all the demographics for the buyers. So I find right around $1 million SDE is sort of the sweet spot. Now, when you're talking below that, you can still get a deal done. It's going to be something at 250. We haven't done one of that size in a long time, but that in the past, a lot of the buyers would just pass that over. Now, there are places where you can sell that, and you're going to be more likely doing an SBA deal or selling to another seller. And in some cases, you can get a decent multiple, even though it's smaller than that, because the buyers, it's just a different buyer class. And in some ways, they don't have some of the same restrictions that, aggregators do. Aggregators have debt covenants and all investor, requirements and things like that can make it challenging in certain cases. But yeah, I don't know if I can speak directly to those smaller deals.
Yeah, fair enough.
Maybe let me jump in, Adam, because
Sure.
And I hesitate to say this publicly because I feel like it's a source of edge, but this is where I play. I play in the sub 500K EBITDA range. I love being down market of all the institutional money because it's less competitive from a buyer perspective. And I think it affords me more opportunities to be flexible with the sellers, bring them along for the ride, strike a deal that might blend the right mix of financial and non-financial objectives of the seller. So, we talked, I guess, a few minutes ago about the individual buyer class. I consider myself one of those. And I think that's the class to watch in the coming 6, 12, 18 months. And that is the way out for brands that are in no man's land, as you called it.
Yeah, I love that perspective, John. All right, so let's kind of talk about multiples. I realize that it's a dynamic question that doesn't have a down the middle answer because there's so many dynamics at play. But just looking at things like Marketplace Pulse, who's just done some phenomenal work in terms of scraping and pulling together information that matters in the space. You could argue, half point here or there, but generally speaking, I think at the height we were seeing kind of a net average of about a 4x multiple. Some of that up front, some of that after. Obviously, it's very deal specific. Obviously, as things have changed, debt availability's changed, aggregator activities changed, et cetera. Buyer pools have changed. We've seen that kind of drop a little bit. I'm just kind of curious if we were to kind of look at that business that's doing, say, $1 million in SDE, kind of in that sweet spot that brings enough buyers to the table. What are you guys seeing in terms of multiples right now in the space? And we can either talk about percentage down from where it was at peak, or if you guys want to name actual kind of general numbers that you've seen. Just kind of curious what you guys have seen from a multiple standpoint if you're at exit here over the next 3 to 6 months.
I can refer to that. I agree that there is no one simple answer to this question,
Yeah.
and since every business is a case by itself, and as much as we are getting far from the previous aggregators kind of environment that we're just looking to buy as many FBA businesses as possible, then each business gets its own valuation. When we are looking at the aggregators themselves, then I would say that there is the upfront payment, the cash paid up front, and the rest of the payments, let's say, those are either deferred or conditional. So altogether, you can get to, let's say, 6 to 7 times the EBITDA or SDE, depends, but the cash up front would be between 3 to 4, I would say. It can be 2.5 up to 4.5. Again, depends on the business and its characteristics. The more differentiated factors exist in the business, like IP, or a unique product or sustainable marketing position, these will generate higher valuation and also above the 4.5 cash upfront. Of course, when we sell to buyers that are more strategic and that a business may be worth for them more, they may pay much more. So we see those too. This is another reason why you cannot just rely upon selling to aggregators these days if you're willing to get a good price.
Cool. Any other perspectives on multiples, guys?
I would just second most of that as well. And with the caveat, multiples are always challenging because it's hard to compare apples to apples when you're talking about multiples for so many reasons. You have SDE multiples, you have EBITDA multiples that sometimes get tossed around interchangeably. You have some brokers including inventory value when they're calculating their multiple. You have some trying to project what the earnout would pay, hypothetically, and including that in the multiple as well. So we also like to really focus on just the pure cash multiple, no inventory included in that multiple, and net of any broker fee. And in our case, the buyers pay it. But after that, like, what is the seller really taking home? I would say right now, it's also really hard to say because it's so business dependent. It can change. We just closed a deal last week at a 5x cash upfront multiple, which would have been a strong deal even at the peak. And there's an earnout on top of that as well. We had one go under LOI this past week at 3.3. And that, again, is just the cash upfront piece. So I think it can give you an idea of where the market is right now.
Yeah. So Paul, maybe ask you specifically, because again, I think you've probably seen more LOI paper, at least in the Amazon FBA context, than most single human beings on planet Earth. And I kind of preach this, when I exited my business, I did a video just kind of walking through the experience and my criteria. And I've got a bit of a history in M&A in my corporate background and have that context, but I valued at least the financial component of the offers that came in very heavily on what that upfront was. Not to say that, hey, it would have been nice to get some additional coin down the line, but when you turn your business over to somebody else, even if all the variables are stacked up with a high probability of that business succeeding and growing, you're turning it over to somebody and you don't know exactly how they're going to run it. And a lot of the folks, at least at that time, didn't have a ton of history. So I've always preached very much like, hey, upfront multiple is it. And if you get something after the fact, bonus, but pretend like that money doesn't even exist. In all the transactions you did, call it 2019 through the end of 2022, just on a percentage basis, how many actually got an earnout of the folks that had that as a component of the structured deal?
Well, I don't, it's funny. My clients, sometimes they don't check in with me and we don't hear back from them. So I'm not always sure who's getting the earnout, but I can say this. We also get a lot of cases from deals we did work on. And we're seeing a lot of non-earnout payments or negotiations to reduce payments, some litigation even.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. I mean, I've said it since you just kind of have to look at the economics. Anything outside of your closing cash is highly speculative on so many levels, and people really need to understand that. Yeah. We preach that every time we talk to the client for the first time, every time we I talk on a podcast, I say the same thing you do. You really have to focus on that closing cash because that's the only thing that's real. Everything else, you have to kind of, you could put a valuation allowance on a $1 million earnout. I'd say, give it a 10% chance of actually happening because it's really just, it's unknown. And it's not about how you negotiate the contract because you have a lot of other factors. One, you have the cost of like suing another company if they don't pay you your earnout. Highly expensive, maybe not worth your earnout unless you have a much bigger deal. Plus, you're taking risks too. When you sue them, they might file their counterclaims, and now and if you lose, you're on the hook for their legal fees. So it can go either way. And then the other problem is, what if they just don't have the money? What if they're just broke? What if then you can't make money? You can win a lawsuit, but money doesn't grow on trees, right? So now what are you doing? You're trying, So it's not viable to think that you really have any claim for that earnout, just from a practical economics perspective, forgetting what the contract says. So I'm with you. I think that's the case. I mean, we have seen earnouts, early on 2019. I mean, I saw multiples at 2.75 and you're kind of like, I guess, it's a nice payday, then you saw them kind of creep up in 2020 into the 3 to 4. It was kind of like early 2020. Early to mid 2020. I was sort of saying like, if you're under $1 million, it was typically like 3.5 closing cash was kind of where you would cap out. or maybe even 3 closing cash and 3.5 all in with potential upside. But then, coming into 2021, especially the second half, that number just popped up, and we're seeing, deals that today might get a 3.5 or a 3.25. We're getting like 5s, right? I mean, at the end of 2021, there were some really small deals that were getting, people making 300,000-400,000 were getting 5x multiples. I mean, it was really strange, and that's sort of where it started to feel like a bubble, But that was just simply a product of how much competition there was in 2021. Like every aggregator was active, right up until about Q4 2021. I think Perch was one of the first ones to kind of dial it back, and then a number of them followed. So it's been an interesting roller coaster, but I agree with everyone. I think you just have to focus on that closing cash amount and be very happy with it. And today, as the multiples are lower and the deals are harder, it's still 3.5 to 4, 4.5. Those are great multiples if you can get them. I mean, obviously depending on how much you're making. If you're into the 3, 4, 5 million, and maybe you need to branch out. And I think that's always my discussion with the clients regarding what they want my feedback on, which broker or banker to work with. It's sort of like, where are you in SDE? Because like I don't know what like Global Wired, I don't know what your minimum is, but for a lot of investment bankers, I think it's like 1.5 before they'll even talk to you. So you kind of, if you're under that, you're sort of in the broker market. You're not really in the banker market. And then the question with the brokers is, and I think Yale's point is, sorry, don't do that. Mikhail's point is that, you want to work with people who have a strong network of not just aggregators, but strategics as well. You want to be broad. You want to find other people outside of the aggregator market, and don't just assume that you're only going to be good for an aggregator. Although, and the one benefit of an aggregator though is that they tend to be quicker, although less so these days. So, but they tend to be a little bit faster than like a traditional banking process. So I don't know. I don't know if that answers your question. I kind of just went off.
No, that's perfect. And for everybody, I really appreciate the transparency. It's super helpful. So let's maybe spend the last 15 minutes here kind of doing an intellectual excavation of kind of what's next in the space. If we say, look at kind of an 18-month time horizon. If you're watching live too, I see Elizabeth asked, at what point can we ask questions? Feel free to throw that in the chat, and we can kind of bring those questions from the audience to the table. But I kind of want to start macro and kind of chip away down into what sellers should and could be doing to really propel an exit event, and how they can kind of focus on the elements that matter to sell a business for the most value, as well as to pass due diligence, all those things. But starting at the macro, obviously, we've got a debt environment, irregardless of what's happened in the space, that's just become more difficult for these larger players that are actually raising funds. And obviously, this space has traditionally been very debt heavy, and debt's been very hard to come by. So markets have softened, interest rates have gone up. That was kind of the first kind of chink in the ability to be able to raise more debt funds. We had the Silicon Valley Bank thing that's really, really kind of scared off, I think, a lot of the institutional debt providers. So money's harder to come by. And that means that just the dry powder available to a lot of these aggregators is not as prevalent. I would also say too, of that top 10 list of folks that have done over $100 million in revenue, by my check, there's only one of them that has raised less money than their revenue. So most of the times we're talking about aggregators that have raised 2, 3, 4, 5x what their actual revenue is. Which creates some challenges. So I guess for more of the investment banking folks and folks that kind of understand those institutional markets, what can we expect in terms of the aggregators' ability to raise money, or even some of these large PE firms that are strategics? How do you see that playing out? Is money available, or are we kind of in a spell over the next year where people have to use the dry powder that they have available and can't really expect to raise more money?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that first, Adam. I think, and I'll try not to go too long, because this can get into some pretty deep concepts around just M&A cycles and things like that. So I'll try to keep it not super dry. So I mean, I think what's going on, you have a kind of a twofold thing, right, within this community. You kind of have, it's part of the broader M&A cycle, and even though I shave most of it off, I have enough little bit of gray hair here to have seen multiple cycles and understand kind of how those tend to feel. I think a lot of people in the Amazon community haven't. There's a lot of young entrepreneurs in this space that have never really been through that. And then also it's going through its own specific, I'd say, forces and things moving around as well. So I think specific to your question, though, I mean, we already know most of these guys, first of all, what they raised is kind of a lot of it's phantom money. It was a big debt facilities that, frankly, their access to has been cut off completely. They're already breaking debt covenants. And so that money is really not real money. Let's start with that.
Yeah.
So they don't have the powder that it may appear they do on a headline basis. I think that, of course, because of the broader cycle, everywhere raising capital is kind of, I think over the next 6 to 9 months, it'll be about as tough as it's going to get. So you're about to go through, I think, the darkest days of struggling for capital raising, et cetera. But at the same time, there are going to be people that, are able to raise money because there's still lots of powder that kind of wants to find a home. It's just becoming really conservative because of the cycle. And there was even an announcement today. These guys over at Kite just raised $200 million from Blackstone, and it's kind of like it's mostly e-com broader, but there's definitely an Amazon bend to it. So I think what you're going to see is aggregators that are pre-existing are going to, I think, struggle quite a bit to get more money. I think that you're going to see, larger Amazon brands that do the right things to make their companies very strategically valuable still get a lot of attention from non-aggregator type buyers, right? So that's one of the really cool things that's happened over these last 5 years is that this was a market that was always treated as kind of like these aren't real companies, these aren't real brands, and that kind of label has been shed, in a lot of ways, and so they're now part of that broader consumer products conversation. So if I'm a traditional PE fund or I'm a strategic consumer products company, I will now seriously consider looking at acquisitions that are heavily Amazon marketplace focused, whereas 5-6 years ago in those 2015-16 days, that wasn't the case. So that's the good news, right? Is that the market is now matured to the point where, hey, you know what? Aggregators were nice for a while. They really pushed a lot of activity in the space, but I don't know that the space needs them anymore. Like, I think it's gonna evolve past them and just become part of the broader consumer products discussion.
Great. John, I'll ask you one specifically again, just because I know your background. Let's just kind of play hypothetical for a little bit. Let's say that I'm an Amazon seller. I've got a $2 million top line business doing $400,000 in earnings, kind of a pretty typical profile. What would you do if you were that person and you're looking 12 months out? So I've decided, hey, I've got another year in me to really go hard at this thing. I expect the market to be a little bit better from an exit standpoint in a year, but I know I need to grow and build my business in that year time frame. What would your advice be to sellers that want to sell in a year or doing $400,000 in earnings to maximize their value 1 year from now?
Yeah, I love that question, Adam. And it's the one that I talk to clients about the most. I think most flavors of advice in this circumstance are operational in nature, right? Push for better product costing from your suppliers, better payment terms, expand your line, expand your retail channels, expand into new geographies. And that's great advice. That should be your focus over the next 12, 18 months to maximize value. But what I want to submit to you or the seller in that case is that there's another path that is maybe a parallel path you take to maximize your value, and that is go to market now. We've talked about what multiples are like. We've kind of played this hypothetical game around what your business is worth. The truth is you don't really know until you gauge interest from buyers, at which point you can sit down and say, well, shoot, this is more than I expected. Let's go down this path. Or you can say, all right, bunker down and go. The advantage of doing that is you develop not only clarity around what your business is worth, but you kind of give yourself psychological permission to double down. Mark Randolph, the co-founder of Netflix, literally tweeted today about a story involving potentially selling Netflix back in 1998 to Bezos for $15 million. And then, of course, they didn't do it. But what he said was, it was a commitment device. It made them realize that they wanted to go all in. And I think that's an option for buyers right now. If you want to exit in 12 months or 18 months, test the market and really understand what your value is. The maybe secondary or tertiary benefit of doing this is also you introduce yourself to buyers. And I can't put my finger on kind of the actual ratio, but a lot of buyer interest that we get at ecom brokers comes from buyers we've talked to, we presented businesses to before, but it just wasn't the right time 6 months, 9 months, 12 months ago. So make those introductions, get to know the buyers in your space. If you're too small for them now, so what? They know you, they'll keep a pulse on you. And then 12 months from now, they'd probably love to be the first one to talk to you, be at the head of the line, and have an opportunity to put an LOI in front of you.
John, that is incredibly sage advice. And I got to say, I've seen a lot of sellers not think that they're ready, or they've got a number in their head that they think they've got to put another year and a half in to get that number. And they've been kicking themselves because they might have been able to get that number had they gone to market. And to your point, it's not a one and done thing that happens. You can have an initial conversation. There might be interest. It may not be a fit at that price point or that size that you built the business to today, but you can carry on that conversation 8, 12, 18 months down the line and still have an effective exit. And, or you might get the number that you wanted right now and not have to spend another, 12 months gathering gray hairs, as Jason alluded to. So I love that answer. We'll maybe cap it at a question. And I know the Fortunate team can kind of chime in on this, but I'm just, obviously with the dynamic that everybody's kind of had to tighten things up a touch, and be mindful of the current both macro and micro environment we're in, getting ready to actually transact a deal. Again, in the fury, people would probably be a little bit loose with due diligence. They might just, let's get this one in because we're about to raise more money. And it was frankly a lot easier to pass those due diligence thresholds. I also think as everybody's got more intelligent in the space, there's probably a more refined, specific due diligence process that takes place now versus what it did in the past. So I'll maybe turn it over to you, Mikhail, just in terms of what would a seller do if we're ready to exit right now? What are some of those due diligence elements that really need to be thoughtfully put together to pass that threshold? Because getting an offer is one thing, getting it to the finish line and getting a big wire to your account are two very different things. So what's that due diligence gauntlet now, and how can sellers prepare if they want to transact right now today?
Yeah, so this is a very important question, and it's kind of a continuation of the previous one, because previously you referred to the kind of due diligence over the market. So it's an external due diligence for your business, which is a must. And I love the John approach here, which we advise to implement also for larger businesses. It's not only if your business is too small. At the same time, you must make sure that you are prepared internally, and with the maturity of this, the growing maturity of this market, there is less tolerance to legal issues, legal problems, to health issues, deviations from the terms of service of Amazon, and other regulations. So you must it's a strong advice to use the time efficiently by making sure that your business checks all the boxes, meaning that you are fully compliant with the Amazon terms of service. Your trademark or trademarks are well registered in all the related geographies and covering all the products that you actually sell, that you pay your tariffs and custom as due, and many other things. Since we have come to the conclusion that this is such an important matter, that this industry still suffers from not always properly meet those requirements, we just recently we haven't even launched it, but we've just added it to our website for the first users. So it's a free tool that allows an Amazon seller to kind of check himself to what extent their business actually meet the legal requirements. So this intent and using the time. The time is an important resource. So before you sell the business, don't think that you should just come to the market at the time that you want to get the money and get home. Get prepared. Use this time in order to fix whatever is fixable, to explore what the market has to offer you, many things can be cured if you have a sufficient time to deal with them. So that's a super important topic.
Appreciate that. All right, guys. So I think that's a wrap, but I'll maybe open it up just in case there's any closing thoughts anybody has, and then I'll kind of wrap up.
I just want to just double stress how important that due diligence is and that pre-due diligence. I mean, it is. There's no reason if an exit is in your future, there's no reason you shouldn't be doing that now. The problem with due diligence, so people understand, is a lot of times aggregators, and even to this day, it's not that they're not doing due diligence. It's not just that they're not doing it. It's also that they're sort of putting the risk on you. Like if something isn't right, they're going to write the contract in a way that says like, you're guaranteeing everything's going to work out for us in terms of, these potential legal issues. And if they don't, we have the right to claw back from you. And that's the issue. So what you want to do is you want to make sure, one, obviously, this is what our job is to help negotiate that so the bite isn't as awful as that first draft purchase agreement typically has it. But the second half of that is, you want to make sure, as you said, not just trademarks. I mean, even photos. Like photos is like, it's such a dumb thing because it's such an easy thing to fix, like your photos. But if you sell, if you have a bunch of ASINs and a bunch of photos, and the wrong person finds out that you don't have the right things, they can cause a lot of misery for the buyer. So it's something that you should really be tracing title to all your photos. If you're using people on Fiverr, find out where are they sourcing their stock photography from. If you're using stock photography on your packaging, do you have the rights? You wouldn't believe how many times just something as simple as photos becomes a problem, just because it's just a mess. When you look at the sellers, like where they got these various images from, it's just a hot mess. And so even little things like that, doing that due diligence and prep work is so important. And I wish people would do it long before they're ready to exit. And I think it is. If you're 12 to 18 months away from where you think you want to exit, then definitely start working on it right now and get sort of legal hygiene. That's what we call it, and make sure you're ready to go.
I just want to add, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Absolutely.
Just to add a few more words about that. You may treat this internal due diligence as, the potential exit of the business can be just the excuse. There is another very good reason why to do this. It is protecting your business. Many businesses actually encounter risks that they do not understand thoroughly what is their magnitude, and maybe their business is not sustainable at all. So you may be dreaming that you are building a strong business that one day you'll be able to exit, but maybe at one single moment in time it will just vanish. So it makes sense to run through this internal check and make sure that you have a real business in your hands.
And we've seen an uptick in that too, because we've seen Amazon, from our Amazon suspension practice, that and we've seen a huge uptick in compliance, which stems from the fact that Amazon is now more liable for these failures of compliance than they ever were in terms of the way the courts are going. So now that Amazon's on the hook for your compliance with FDA law, FTC law, whatever it is, Amazon's cracking down on the sellers. So we're inundated with these compliance issues all day long. So and sometimes you get a case where it's like, that product you're selling needs to be, FDA, goes through FDA pre-clearance notification, class 2, whatever, and that's not going to happen in a week. That's going to take, could take 6 months to a year. We have a amazing FDA attorney that we work with, but it's sad when things like that happen, and you need to know that. So yeah, I'm a big believer you should be doing your due diligence. It should be like brushing your teeth. It's hygiene. You should be doing it in real time as you go, not just, a couple of weeks before you exit, figuring it all out. I think it'll make your life easier, whether you sell or not, as Mihail points out. I think it's just so important to do those kinds of things. And the last thing I'll say is, just because we mentioned IP as a value, is really go back and consider patents, because I think in terms of, and this is a point Mihail made, like the better your IP is, the more of a market dominant position you have, the better your valuation is going to be. If you have something that you're the only person who can sell it, that's going to be a lot better in terms of, than having just, the risk of full competition on Amazon, as which can be a mess. So, when you're about to launch a product, have a conversation with a lawyer about patent, because, it's a little pricey, but if you can pull it off, it's really worth it these days. So consider that as well.
Awesome, guys. Well, I truly did love this conversation. This is just business geek fun for me, but I know that you guys unlocked a lot of insights that you just really don't hear anywhere else. And again, getting back to kind of being real, sometimes it's difficult to be real and professionally vulnerable. And everybody in the information you guys opened up and shared today matters. So I thank you truly for being here, for being honest and open. I think it's helped me. It's helped a lot of sellers that obviously listen to this live and will listen to it after the fact. We'll drop some show notes down in the podcast, as well as when this goes live on YouTube, both on the Seller Sessions as well as the Adam Heist YouTube channel, with links to everybody that was here. I highly suggest, if you're getting ready for an exit event, whether it's a brokerage, whether it's a private equity firm, an attorney, or just somebody you want to reach out to for advice, now's not the time to be cheap. I definitely recommend that you reach out to these pros when you're ready to do that. So thank you guys so much for tuning in, especially to the panel. Truly appreciate what you guys brought to the table today. And we're going to be back live again here later this week. And pay attention as well. We're going to be at Seller Sessions Live in London, one of my favorite events and favorite cities, on May 13th. So we'll be doing some more stuff in advance of that event. But until then, guys, I hope you guys have an awesome rest of your week. Hopefully it's warming up in spring and sunny wherever you are, and have a fantastic weekend. Cheers.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, guys.